Welcome everybody to Integrate Yourself. I'm your host, Allison Pelot, and you can find me at pureenergypdx.com. We're here today back with Greg Schmaus. He's a wonderful guest. He was on the show not too long ago, actually, but he's back today because it's such an important topic to talk about mental health in this day and age. Greg is the CEO of Healing4D, a holistic health practitioner, shamanic healer. He's also a massage therapist. He's the creator of HealingThe Mind, a 21-day holistic mental health program. Thank you so much, Greg, for coming back on the show. I was so excited for you to come back on because as you and I were talking, really mental health has become even more of an important issue than when we last talked, and I'll also reference the last show you were on, but now you have some really new things to talk about, some different offerings, but I would like to, start by hitting upon, in this conversation today, upon some important issues that we're dealing with right now based on current events, because things have been changing weekly.
Daily, hourly, by the seconds.
Yes.
But, I appreciate you having me back on. I'm excited to be here. And, in terms of everything that's going on, I think that what we're experiencing is nothing new. It's nothing that we haven't experienced before. It's just any time that we, have a pandemic like this, it's just magnifying what's been there all along, but maybe has been kind of swept under the rug or been flying under the radar. But, I think if we're experiencing higher levels of anxiety, we've probably had anxiety in the past. And this is just magnifying it. If we're, divided in any way, or, it's really an opportunity for us to explore our collective shadow and explore, what's being called forth to be healed. And, what's important for people to remember is that if something outside of us is triggering us, it means that there was a trigger already inside of us.
Yes.
So if the pandemic is triggering stress and anxiety and fear and panic and division and these polarities and all this kind of stuff, it means that stuff was laying dormant all along. And we needed something like a pandemic to activate those parts of ourselves in order for us to bring that stuff to the surface so we can resolve it, heal it, and clear it. So I do think that there's a lot of purpose behind everything that's unfolding in the world.
I agree. There's a lot of gifts in there, right? Of self-improvement and self-awareness, for sure. I know I've experienced that along this whole journey. As soon as it started, I think back sometimes about like what I was feeling when it all began, and like how far I've come since the beginning of all this, and how much really it's helped me as well, just on a personal level in my own self-growth, and I talked to one of my very good friends and coaches, Roseanne Grace, and she says, you've got to be able to, in order to use the skills that you've learned, you've got to, be challenged, right, to use those skills. And this is really what we're being faced with right now.
Yeah. And I remember, I used to live in Hilton Head, South Carolina, and I lived in Charleston, South Carolina. And I just got back from there a couple of days ago, and it's like such a slow pace. Everyone's so kind and friendly. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I love it here. I never want to leave. And I moved up to New Jersey, right outside of Manhattan. And like, I grew up here, but when I moved back, it was like, oh my gosh, like the pace is so fast and everyone's like honking their horns and feels so rude. And I remember I was working with our mutual friend, Paul Chek. He was my coach many years ago. I still work with him, but I was working with him on a more regular basis. And he said to me, he's like, well, if you wanted to be a firefighter, do you want to be where there are no fires, or do you need to go where the fires are? And I was like, really, oh my gosh, that's so true. It's like, well, if I'm a holistic health practitioner and helping people with their mental, emotional, and spiritual health, like you need to be where the action is. You need to be
Yeah.
where things are, a little out of sorts, where there's a little chaos, and, bring some of that stillness to the storm. So it's a great opportunity for, practitioners like ourselves to really kind of step into that role of, being the change. And, something that's been really important for me is understanding that this pandemic, I've grown tremendously, and it's unpacked a lot of my shadow. And it's given me an opportunity to take a look at, a lot of my hiding spots and a lot of my, dogmas and belief systems that were, maybe limiting me. And it was an opportunity for me to look at all of that, just like everyone else.
Yeah, we're all in the same boat in some
Yeah.
respects, right? Yeah. Yeah, so great opportunity, yes, and also, you know, good time to flex your muscles and actually, integrate what you've learned, right? Like it's one thing to just sit in class and learn these things and understand the concepts and yeah, that makes sense, but to live it
Hmm.
and actually apply it, that's a whole
Yeah.
nother thing, right?
Yeah. And that's really you know, knowledge embodied is really where we get empowered.
Yeah.
And for me, that's been a huge thing for me recently, is really taking the knowledge that I've accumulated and really embody it in practice. And this pandemic has been a great opportunity to practice everything that I've, learned and accumulated in terms of information. But
Yes.
for me, like, information that's not applied is kind of like consuming food that you haven't like digested and assimilated. And it just like
Yes.
creates more like constipation and more backup in the system. It's like, well, if you're not applying what you're learning and accumulating, it's just information that's not put in formation. It's not put into any sort of structure that you
Right.
utilize. So it's just, it just becomes kind of like intellectual, you know,
Excess.
nonsense. So
Yeah, yeah,
excess. Yeah.
totally.
So
Yeah.
that's really, for me, I've learned a lot recently, especially, my new online program, which is Healing the Mind, is really understanding how the mind works and how a lot of our belief systems and, ideas get projected. And, a lot of what we're experiencing with the pandemic is such like polarization and division,
Yes.
and
That's what it feels
where
like.
like we
Yeah.
gain our sense of self and sense of identity in belief systems, and we kind of like,
Yeah.
whether it's, about vaccines or about politics or whatever it is, like we kind of take
Hmm.
this belief system and create almost like this tribalism out of it and attach our sense of self to it. And anything that's like different than what you believe is like a threat to your identity. So it's kind of,
Yeah.
interesting how we have like this over identification with the mind and over identification with thought and belief, and how much like we're willing to actually like sabotage ourselves as a way of like defending those beliefs. It's like you're
Yes.
willing to like completely like stress yourself out and wind yourself up and dysregulate your nervous system just to defend a belief system. It's like, well,
Yeah.
it feels very backwards,
Mm-hmm.
so
Mm-hmm.
something for me that's been really important is to understand that collectively our nervous system is in like this fight or flight state. It's trapped
Yeah.
in this sympathetic stress response. And when we're trapped in that sympathetic fight or flight state, it creates more polarization, it creates more division.
Yeah.
Because in order for us to feel safe and in order to survive, like when we were living out in nature, belonging to a tribe was a good idea. Because if you belonged to a tribe, you had a place to sleep, you were going to get fed, like you were safe.
Mm-hmm.
Where if you
Right.
didn't belong to a tribe, there was, a lack of safety, a lack of security. So the more stress we're under, the more we look to attach to certain tribes. And in our
Mm.
modern day, since we don't actually have physical tribes, we have belief systems.
Ah, that makes
And the
sense.
belief
Yeah.
system is the tribe that we attach to, and we defend it like our life is dependent on it. And the more stress we're
Yeah.
under, the less bandwidth we have to integrate anything that's different, because anything that's different is a threat to your survival. So it's just really interesting how we kind of like use the mind and how the mind gets affected by stress and kind of like the climate of the world and how much polarization and division and attachment to certain belief systems we have. So just the awareness of all of that is so important in order for us to really say, okay, like, I remember like JP Sears saying once, there's nothing wrong with having beliefs, just don't believe your beliefs. And it's just like, that's so spot on. It's like, okay, I have my beliefs, but I also have like this sense of self that's separate from my beliefs. Like there's me, and then there's me that has the beliefs. I'm not my beliefs. I'm the one that's in possession of them. And my beliefs might change. Just like the beliefs that I have now are very different than the beliefs that I had when I was in 4th grade. But there's such like an unwillingness to change your belief, because changing your belief is kind of like going through basically like an ego death, right? An ego dissolution. So it's very interesting, just everything that's unfolding on more of a mental, emotional level.
Absolutely. I love that. And what that also brings up is with identity and how people hang on to old identities and hanging on to old ways of seeing yourself and experiencing yourself through others is like it there comes a point where it doesn't serve you anymore. It actually stifles your growth, right?
Yeah.
And I feel like that's what I see some people doing. I literally, I talked about this in my last episode. I have been going through a purge of old identity for myself on a personal level. Even went so far as to, I had this like box of VHS tapes that my dad had filmed of my old gymnastics meets, like a lot of them, not all of them, but many, many of them. I had just a huge box full of just VHS tapes that I couldn't even watch because I don't have a VHS player anymore. And I wasn't planning on like converting them at any time. So I was like, why am I hanging on to these? Like, because I was hanging on to that old identity of being a gymnast and being able to do this cool stuff, and like, but that's not me anymore, and I'm like, why don't I just get rid of this? This can be a symbol of, honoring that part of myself. I'm not saying like not to honor that, but there's like, why do I need to hang on or attach to that identity anymore? Especially if I need to open myself up to, much more, and make space for that. And so that's just an example of, you can do it on a physical level. You can do it on an energetic level, an emotional level, like letting go of emotional baggage or emotional attachments, right? There's ways of shifting those identities. But I think what people get scared about, and what I have also experienced, is when you let go of all those old identities and you've really identified and attached to those for some time, then who are you then? And what are you like? Like you're just kind of in a little bit of a holding pattern or a void, right? You have to wait for something new to come in, which is that space, giving yourself that space to trust, And so I see a lot of that happening right now, and because things are really shifting and things are changing and not really necessarily going back to the way they were, good or bad, or however you want to see it. But yet we're still trying to hang on to those old beliefs, those old identities of how things used to be and how we were and how we were seen and how we want to be seen. But that's not serving many of us anymore, right?
But it's familiar.
Yeah. And
right?
That's the cognitive distance, right? Is that what that would be?
Familiar.
Yeah.
And, I think there's patterns that once served a purpose in our life. There's belief patterns, behavior patterns that once served a purpose in our life. And we reach a point where those are no longer serving us. And from my experience, our health crisis usually arrives when we're in that transition period. And we're getting the notification of like, hey, the way you were doing this before, not serving you anymore. If you continue to do it the way you've been doing it, these are the symptoms that I'm going to be giving you. I'm kind of like the body talking to you.
Yeah.
Like I'm I'm going to be
Right.
giving you these symptoms like digestive disorders and migraines and anxiety. And it's
Right.
just really kind of like the alarm going off saying like, hey, it's time to let go of the old stories. It's
Yeah.
time to let go of the old myth. That's why myth is so powerful, because the myth is really the inner story that we live by. And the health challenge arises when the old myth is ready to die off and the counter myth or the new myth is ready to emerge. But if we don't have the courage to let go of the old myth and step into the new myth, that's where a lot of our health crisis or midlife crisis, a lot of that um, comes to the surface. And, you know, it's always important for me to like, whatever's going on individually, look how it's unfolding collectively.
Yeah. Let's talk
So,
about that.
you
Yeah.
know, everything with the pandemic, with a lot of, the control and the abuse of power and all of that, that's really a lot of our old myth breaking down. It's kind of like the old ego
Yes.
structure unraveling.
Right.
And when the old ego structure is unraveling, it's kind of like the ego like puts up its last fight. It's like I got one more fight in me, and before I'm going down swinging. And it's kind of like also, for example, when you have bacteria or like parasites in the body and you start killing them off, there's die off symptoms. They
Yeah.
start releasing
Right.
chemicals and like releasing metals and things like
Because
that.
like
And you
we
have to
want to
detox all
survive.
of them. They want to survive. So there's kind of like what we call as die off symptoms is like collectively there's an ego die off,
Mm-hmm.
right? And
Oh
the ego
yeah.
die
Yeah.
off is kind of like, all right, last battle, going down swinging. And what we're
Yeah.
seeing is really just the collective ego unraveling. And, we're moving into a new paradigm. And I think, we're going through kind of like that dark night of the soul before we come out the other side. And what we're seeing, which a lot of us are really concerned about, is really just the collective shadow coming to the surface. And
Mm-hmm.
it's kind of like we're going through a collective shamanic journey. And it's an opportunity for us to all, see the parts of ourselves that we haven't been willing to look at. And I know for me, that's been many, many parts of myself, the parts of myself that's, righteous and defensive and,
Yeah.
thinks my beliefs are better than yours. And feel like, if my belief is different than yours, then it's my job to project my beliefs onto you. And you should believe what I believe. And, all these ideas of my own ego structure, I've had to come face to face with. And, there's a couple things that have been important for me, kind of creating those shifts and engaging the world in a different way. And one thing has been for me is making sure that I'm for something, not against something.
That's a
I
good
think
way
a
to
lot
look
of
at it.
us are,
Mm-hmm.
are kind of like standing for what we're against, but like not really sure like what we're for.
Yeah.
So kind
So
of like
therefore,
shifting
there's no
that a little bit
solution
is,
really. Yeah. I'm
yeah, it's
just
like I
like,
see the
yeah.
problem, but I'm not actually being the solution.
Yeah.
So it's like, what am I
Right.
for, not what am I against? And then also knowing that everyone's in this constant stress response, in this fight or flight response, and trying to change someone's mind when they're in a stress response is not a good idea,
Mm-mm.
right? Because we have that default mode network, which is like, when you're under stress, do what you've always done, think what you've always thought, believe what you've always believed, because it's
Yeah.
kept you alive until now. And anything different, which is unfamiliar and the unknown, might be a threat to your survival. So you want to shut all of that down. So a big thing for me has been a mantra, which is anytime I'm engaged with someone that I can tell is kind of wound up or under stress, and you can
Mm-hmm.
definitely see like they're, starting to kind of project and want to engage, and has
Right.
been, don't try and change their mind, shift their state.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And when you can shift their state, you shift them from that sympathetic to that parasympathetic state. You start to open the bandwidth, like the bandwidth starts to open a little bit and they're a little bit more receptive. But if you try and knock on the door when they're in that stress response, good luck getting in. It's just not going to
Yeah.
happen.
Right. Right.
So definitely just being what I'm for, not what I'm against. And then shifting the state, not changing the mind. And once you shift the state, then the mind is open to entertain a new idea. So
Yes.
that's been a big thing for me. And knowing that, like, when I find myself not open to someone else's opinion, it's probably because I'm in some sort of stress response.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So it's really
Right.
making sure that I'm balancing my own nervous system And therefore, in the presence of someone under stress, I can be a balancing energy for them.
Mm-hmm.
So then their nervous system starts to balance out, and then we can meet each other where we're at. So those have
Yeah.
been some really important elements that I think anyone can kind of take and put in their back pocket when it comes to navigating the pandemic on a mental, emotional level and in relationships.
Yeah, yeah, because so many relationships have shifted, right, since this all
Mm-hmm.
started as well.
Yeah.
And I've noticed on a personal level many things that I thought, I thought people were like beliefs that people had or values people had. And I thought I knew where people or what to expect about where people are coming from is not a given anymore from
Mm-hmm.
from many people I know.
Yeah.
And that's okay. I get it. Like we're all changing and growing and shifting. With that, it's like kind of then you start to think, wow, what can I say around this person? What can't I say around this person?
Mm-hmm.
And like you said, like I like how you put that, changing the state instead of, because it is about being in that sympathetic nervous system mode. It's a fear mode, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's you're just going to have to some extent blinders on as far as being able to be adaptable or be able to have a discussion with someone, um, you know, if you are in that mode, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And also, we were talking about kind of this attachment to belief system. For me, one of the staples in my own life and, in a lot of my coaching work is meditation.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And meditation or mindfulness is really the practice of being that witness or being that observer. And
Yes.
when you can kind of get into that state of being that witness and being that observer, you kind of create this sense of self of like, okay, I'm the one that's witnessing my mind. I'm the one that's observing my thoughts. So when I have all my belief system, I actually have a sense of self that's separate from them because I'm the one witnessing them. So that's to me why, meditation is so important for anyone in a time like this when there's so much polarization, so much division when it comes to belief system, is to always have some practice that can allow you to step outside of your belief system, to step
Yeah.
outside of your mind, to step outside of that constant stream of thought. And when you can step outside and find that place of stillness, and when that thought arises, you can just witness it of like, oh, I notice these thoughts coming up for me, but I'm the one noticing them, right?
Yeah.
There's a huge shift
Right.
that happens when you get into that space where you're witnessing your minds, your thoughts, and your beliefs. Because, once you gain that sense of self that's separate from the mind, you're not as defensive anymore. Because
Yeah.
you're like, okay, well, there might be someone that has a different belief system than me, but I am me, not my beliefs. So therefore, their belief system that's different than mine is not a threat to me. So
Right.
therefore, I don't really feel as much of a need to defend any of that. So that's where, meditation and mindfulness is so important. And in my online program that we'll talk about, I have this meditation called the Lifeguard Tower, which Paul Chek actually taught me in our coaching. And the Lifeguard Tower is where you climb up to the top and you're able to witness everything. So you have
Oh,
all the
yeah.
activity like on the beach and in the ocean. The ocean's kind of like the flow of your mind, and all the people in the ocean's all the activity in your life. And the
Yeah.
lifeguard's just the one that's watching all of it. Like if he sees anything that's too crazy that, you need to intervene or there might be some sort of danger, like we can climb down the tower and get involved.
Mm-hmm.
But in reality, like who we really are is just the one up in the tower witnessing all of it. So
Yeah.
that's a meditation that I take a lot of my clients through and students in my program, of climbing up to the lifeguard tower and just being able to witness all of it. And the more we can kind of sit in that higher vantage point of awareness,
Yeah.
the less reactive we are, the more responsive, and the more we're able to really meet people where they're at, especially when they have belief systems that differ from our own.
I love that. I love that so much
Yeah.
because you're not identifying with the mind, you're not identifying with your thoughts and your beliefs. Instead, you're becoming the observer, like you say. And that has been also a big thing that I've stepped into more so recently because we are taught that our thoughts are who we are, or, our
Hmm.
perception, or, even though just the way we see things is very unique to each person, don't get me wrong. It's great to acknowledge that and see that within every person. But at the same time, like you say, the thoughts that come through, they're not who you are. You are so
Hmm.
much more than that. Because if we were just our thoughts, think about how limited we'd be in our lives if we were just our
Hmm.
thoughts, or everything that we thought we identified with. I mean, so what the importance of the meditation I see is really training your mind, because it's no different than the body, as far as training goes. I mean, you got to keep your
Yeah.
body in shape, right? You got to feed it good food. You've got to breathe properly, get hydrated, sleep well, treat your mind the same way, give it what it
Hmm.
needs to thrive, and to do what it's
Yeah.
here to do. It's not here to take over your life. It's here to be here as a tool to help you, much like your body is too. But but and to realize that you're more than that, right?
Yeah. And what's
Yeah.
also important there is, if you took all of your thoughts that you had throughout the day and you transcribed them, and all of your beliefs that you have, and you wrote all of them down, and then you read through them and said, how many of these are actually originally mine? It's like less than 1%,
Yeah.
right? I would say
Yeah.
99% of the thoughts and beliefs that we have are thoughts and beliefs that have been instilled in us and programmed into us from our parents, our family, our teachers, our coaches, our priests, our rabbis, usually in the first 7 to 12 years of our life, where we're just in
Yeah.
full download mode. We're like a sponge, just absorbing all that information. We have no filter. And that creates kind of like the foundation of what you call your mind or your psyche. So most of the thoughts and beliefs that you're having are the same thoughts and beliefs that your parents had, that your teachers had, that their parents had, and their teachers had. So what you're calling as your mind is really the collective mind. And your individual mind is really just a unique perspective of the collective. It's a unique
Yeah.
experience of the collective.
Right. Right.
So it's kind of like your individual mind is like an antenna system, and the collective mind is the radio, and you're just tuning into certain channels, and you're calling it your own thoughts and your own beliefs, but you're really just tapping into the collective thoughts and the collective beliefs and creating the illusion that they're actually yours. So that's
Right.
where, Byron Katie's work is really powerful, of what she calls the work of questioning your belief systems.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Of, question number one, is it true? Just asking that very simple question, is this belief actually true? It's
Yeah.
like, well, most of the time there's not really much evidence. And then the second question, are you actually positive it's true? If you're positive, like, what's the evidence that it's actually true? And, how do you
Right.
feel when you believe this belief? And then there's the turnaround and, flipping the coin. So, that's where questioning the beliefs and asking, is it true? And how do I feel when I experience this belief? And kind of tying that in with a lot of, Paul's work and the Chek Institute. And, step number one is asking the question, what's your dream?
All right.
You know, and,
Yeah.
and saying like, okay, well, is this belief system in alignment with my dream? Well, most of the time, the limiting belief systems are not really in alignment with the dream. So once we have the meditation practice put in place where we can witness the thoughts and be the observer sitting in the lifeguard tower, and then we can do some of the work of questioning the belief systems of, is this really true? And then having an established dream or purpose statement, and then allowing ourselves to filter our belief system based on our dream and our purpose, then we can start to really kind of grow out of that child archetype of just
Yeah.
downloading what mom and dad said is true, and then saying, okay, like, well, what's really serving me? And we can start to actually filter out the thoughts and the beliefs that are not really serving us anymore, that are, outdated, like you were sharing earlier. And that's where we start to create a new myth for ourselves of, okay, these beliefs are serving me, I'm going to hold on to these beliefs are not serving me, I'm ready to let go of these. But the prerequisite to all of that is to have a sense of self that's separate from those.
Yeah. That was going to be
And
my next question, is the meditation is providing that practice of training the mind, and then how do we then step into knowing where we stop and others begin? You know what I mean?
Well, that's where boundaries are so important,
Yeah, right.
and that's where, a lot of the, spiritual practice and spiritual growth that we do happens in relationship, and understanding that, I'm responsible for my 50% and you're responsible for your 50%. And there's a boundary between the two. So there's the two I's, but then there's the collective we that we share in their relationship. And, I'm responsible for my needs and my values, and you're responsible for your needs and your values. And, we honor ourselves first, and then we come together in partnership. And I think where we get into trouble is where we still have a lot of unresolved fear and unresolved wound in partnership and relationship. Maybe where we have a fear of triggering others, or we're kind of like the people pleaser.
Yeah,
or
I know that
our sense of self is woven into how we seek approval in relationship. And a lot of these kind of patterns where the boundaries are not really clear of where I end and you begin, and I'm pleasing you and seeking your approval, and I'm afraid of triggering you, and all of a sudden I kind of abandon myself, and I kind of compromise my beliefs or my values, and I step out of alignment with what I feel congruent in. And that's the prostitute archetype. Right? The prostitute archetype is the archetype where there are no boundaries, where we're being taken advantage of, or we're allowing ourselves to be taken advantage of, and there's just no honoring of yourself. There's really no commitment to living in alignment with what your inner truth is. Another thing for me is having boundaries with how much you consume when it comes to outer information.
Yes,
and
that's important.
People do not have boundaries and parameters when it comes to that. There's just a flow of incoming information nonstop. And when you have that much information coming in, it's very hard to stay connected to your inner truth, because you're always being fed what other people's truth is and what they think your truth should be. And you have no inner compass anymore, because you're full of so much information. You don't know how to get back to your center.
Yeah.
So the more information we consume, the more externalized we become. And we don't know how to differentiate our beliefs from the beliefs that have been instilled in us. So that's where, for me, even taking breaks from consuming information and having kind of that digital detox, and spending more time in stillness and in contemplation and journaling and all those practices that help you reconnect to your own inner compass, your own inner truth, and really allow that to be your source of guidance. And using information as it's serving you, but making sure that the consumption of information is just like the consumption of food, that it's high quality, that it's in the right dosage, and making sure we're not over consuming or under consuming, making sure that we're sourcing it properly. And there's a lot of parallels in how we consume food and how we consume information, and how we digest and assimilate all of that, and hopefully eliminate it as well, so we can stay clear. So all of these things are so important. But, for me, the boundaries are really what give us a sense of self.
Yeah.
And I think what we're experiencing with, the collective during the pandemic is a huge breakdown in boundaries.
That's what it seems like has happened.
Huge breakdown in boundaries. And remember, the less we have instilled boundaries, the more permeable we are, the more absorbent we are. And the more permeable and absorbent we are, the less empowered we are, and the more stress we're under, because we get more defensive. And remember, the body and the mind always mirror each other. So if you think about, for example, we have boundaries in the body. If you think about like the gut lining, that's a boundary. That's the interface between the inner and the outer environments. Like in the gut, we have the outer environment, which is the food that comes in. But there's a boundary that separates you and your bloodstream and what's actually like your cells from what's in the gut, which is all of the plants and the animals from the outer environment. But when that boundary breaks down and we start absorbing all of the outer stuff into the general circulation and bloodstream, now the immune system's confused as to what's you and what's not you.
It's a
So now
great
we have this
analogy.
immune system that's on high alert, which the
Yeah.
immune system is your defensiveness, right?
Right. Right.
So what we have to do is we have to re-intact the boundaries. We
Mm.
have to repair the boundaries. And when you repair the boundaries, now you know how to differentiate what's you and what's not you. And your immune system can start to relax and you don't have to be as defensive. And now the nervous system can start to calm down and we can really, live in more balance and harmony. But what's happening in the outer environment is mirroring what's happening in the inner environments.
Mm-hmm.
When we have a
Right.
breakdown of boundaries in the outer world with, excessive technology, excessive information consumption, poor boundaries in relationships by not honoring your needs and your values, all of these things we start to break down. We feel disempowered, we feel absorbent, we feel permeable. And
Yeah.
all of a sudden, our nervous system's on high alert because we always feel like we're under attack.
You don't feel safe, right?
We don't feel
Yeah.
safe
Yeah.
anymore. So, just like we have kind of the leaky gut, the breakdown of boundaries in the body, same things being mirrored in our outer environment. So, to me, the boundaries are really being called forth to be healed as well in all of our relationships, not just with people, but with all of the things we're in relationship with,
Yeah. Right. Including ourselves, right?
including ourselves,
Yeah.
things we consume, things we do too much of, things we consume too much of, all of that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Yes, that's oh my God. That's good stuff and a lot of really good I love that analogy too with the gut and the how we're really our boundaries are breaking down as and I think there's maybe a reestablishing of boundaries that maybe like you said earlier, maybe people didn't actually have really strong boundaries before and now it's really just showing up, right?
Yeah.
As they are being as we're being I guess challenged more in that area. But I know I have also, on a personal level, really gone through being able to set better boundaries through this whole thing. I feel like it's been a good practice for me for sure.
Yeah.
But I think, yeah, we're being challenged with boundaries right now.
And emotional boundaries,
So many.
right?
Yes, emotional
Emotional
boundaries. Yeah, with
boundaries.
relationships. I mean, I know so many people that are going through relationship stuff. I've been going through relationship stuff. It's just like a lot of things all at once,
Yeah.
and it can make your nervous system pretty stressed, and especially if you don't have a great foundation, right? And
Yeah.
that would include, the health and food, good movement, good sleep. We're not getting those things, especially when we're stressed, and especially if they're not already in place. But those are the things that really help when we're already stressed emotionally, or we're our environment is changing, and we're not feeling as safe anymore. But the thing I think that people really leave out about health most is the ability to relax,
Mhm.
and that's rarely talked about, but it's like one of the most important components of health. And like if you are doing all these things, but you're still not able to relax, then you're missing something's missing, right? And
That-
so, yeah,
yeah. That's where our physical health and our mental emotional health are so woven together,
right,
is when we're not taking care of our basic needs and dialing in, those four doctors and six foundation principles of, nutrition and sleep and breath and movement and just all those basic principles that we really need to achieve baseline health. When we're not dialing those in, we're already under stress,
yeah,
right? And when we're
exactly,
already under stress, you're not going to engage the outer world in a positive way because the lens in which you're perceiving the outer world from is your body.
yes, exactly,
So if
yeah,
you're living in a body that's constantly under stress, you're going to perceive the outer world as stressful because the lens of perception is really coming from a place of stress right from the start. So that's where making sure that your own internal system is well balanced, that's the prerequisite to navigating a stressful world, is just
yeah,
making sure you're dialing in the basics. And that's
right,
what I think we have a tendency, talking about the ego, to miss out on, is the power of simplicity and the power of the basics, of
yeah,
just dialing in good food, good sleep, good water, good movements,
Yes.
just good, healthy self-care. And then everything else is kind of icing on the cake. Everything else comes after that. So to really be healthy on a mental, emotional level, and on the level of relationships, and, you know, in our work and all the things that we engage in the outer world, we have to dial in the basics first. And for me,
Yeah.
it's just absolute, just, foundational principles. Like, you can't overlook that. And it's very hard to do a lot of the deeper healing work when we're not dialing in those basics to begin with, because our bandwidth to do a lot of that work is very low when you're constantly under stress to begin with. So,
Yeah. It's
that's,
and
go ahead.
correct me if I'm wrong, Greg. It almost seems at times that the basics have been replaced by other basics, right? Like that are perceived as basics. You know,
Yeah. And that's,
if you know what I
it's
mean.
interesting where, we, like you're saying, we kind of have this idea of like alternative health, and then like conventional,
Yeah.
like
I thought
medicine,
about
like
that the other day.
alternative
I'm like, what do you
medicine,
mean
conventional,
alternative? It feels like
like
that's
it's like
health.
nutrition and sleep and movement and
Yeah.
breathing, like that's alternative. It's like,
Like,
shouldn't
wait.
that be like the convention? And then if that doesn't work and you need something else, like, let's find an alternative,
Yeah. Right. It's weird.
like a
Yeah.
medication or a supplement or what. Yeah. So it does feel like very backwards. But I think a lot, obviously there's, financial incentives and,
Yeah.
a lot of, industries at play here, but also the ego has a hard time with simplicity. The ego has a
Okay,
hard
that
time
makes
with the
sense.
basics.
Yes, because
If you have like this
yeah.
complex issue, like I have all these digestive issues, or I have this chronic back pain or shoulder pain, or I have, you know, chronic obsessive compulsive disorder, anxiety or depression. And, it seems like this real complex issue that I've had for, many, many years. And you say to yourself, well, if I got my sleep dialed in, and if I got my diet cleaned up, and I started exercising and spending more time outdoors, and learning how to breathe properly and drink clean water, and, all these basic stuff, the ego's like, it can't be that simple. The ego kind of like feels like, well, if it's really that simple, I feel dumb.
Yeah, like what am I supposed to do now if it's
Must
that
be a
simple?
complex answer to this complex issue.
Yeah.
And if there's a simple answer to the complex issue, then I kind of feel bad about myself.
That makes so much sense because we all make, I mean, I know I've been guilty of it, making things way more complex than they should be.
Yeah.
But in health, especially, I feel like that it gets, and what is even, I don't even consider health also makes health complex. Like,
Mm-hmm.
within the pharmaceuticals, it's like, okay, it shouldn't be this hard. Actually, there's better things than this, and, easier ways. And we're not even considering that. So
Yeah.
that makes sense that that would be the case because it seems like a lot of times it's like this journey people want to go on of some kind of suffering or I don't know, like maybe it is, and then that if it's about the ego, that makes total sense, right?
Well, it's kind of like this idea of, I'm willing to attach myself to these beliefs
Mm-hmm.
and storylines, and I'm so attached to them that I'm willing to
Right.
sacrifice my own health
Yeah.
just
Okay.
to maintain this identity that I have in this belief system. So that's where, like, the ego is literally willing to sabotage your own health just to
Yeah.
maintain its identity in some storyline or some belief system. So that's where it really takes the courage to let go of the old myth and replace it with a new one, which in my coaching practice, I do a lot of myth writing where
Oh
we
wow.
actually write our new myth. And a lot of times we actually don't write it literally. It's more of a metaphorical, symbolic nature
Yeah.
of writing, but it's really powerful to write your own myth and understand the myth that's being called to be let go of, and the
Mm-hmm.
myth that's being called in for you to really embody.
I like
And,
that.
that's really, I think what we're going through right now collectively is we're starting to allow a new myth to emerge. And the old
Yeah,
myth is just holding on for dear
that's what
life.
it feels like. That's
Right.
what it feels like. Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but one other thing when it comes to the boundaries that I feel like is really important, especially with people that just feel really stressed out right now and really
Mm-hmm.
anxious, is boundaries are also creating structure. Right? If you think about
Yes.
boundaries are
Mm-hmm.
structure that we create. And structure is really what directs the flow of our energy.
That's a
Right?
great way
If
to
you
put it.
think
Yeah.
about, in Chinese medicine, we have the five elements,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and two of those elements are water and metal, right?
Yeah.
So metal
Yeah.
is structure, and
Mm-hmm.
water is really the flow of your life force. So if you think about kind of like a pipe is the metal structure that directs the flow of water,
Oh,
where
yeah.
without the structure of the pipe,
Right.
without the structure of the metal, the water doesn't know which direction it's supposed to flow in. So either it fragments and just flows in a million directions, or it just becomes stagnant and becomes a puddle.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. So the structure that we set up in our life through, healthy routines and healthy rituals, setting boundaries in terms of our time and our space, and setting aside time and space for exercise and meditation, and
Right.
staying consistent with this structure in our routines and ritual with sacred time and sacred boundaries, that really helps us direct the flow of our energy. Where most
Yeah.
people, they don't have enough structure in their life. So they don't have the structure put in place to direct the flow of their energy. So they either become stagnant with their energy, which is kind of like depression, or
Mm-hmm.
they become
Right.
fragmented with their energy, which is kind of like anxiety. So the balance
Yeah.
is really the structure we put in place to direct the flow of our energy.
So it's our
And that's something,
container for
it's
the
the
energy.
container. Yeah. The metals are
Yeah.
the container that
Mm-hmm.
directs the flow of our life force.
Yeah. Otherwise, it's just
That
chaotic and it's
container.
just kind of,
Yeah.
yeah.
If
Or
you don't
like you
have
said,
that
stagnant.
container, you also have a hard time differentiating you from the other.
Yes.
If you
Yes.
don't have the
Yes.
boundaries and the structure, you have a hard time differentiating you from the outer world. So the inner
Yes.
and the outer becomes, merged into one, and that's where it creates a lot of stress. So that's where having daily routines and morning rituals and having sacred time to really do your prayer or your meditation or go for a walk or do your journaling or whatever it might be, and just having
Yeah.
even if it's just 10 minutes, just day in and day out, really helps you anchor yourself in yourself,
Yeah.
and makes it way easier to navigate the outer world when you're kind of anchored in that ritual.
Absolutely. I know irritated if I don't give myself that time. Right.
Yeah,
It's, yeah. I have to do it.
absolutely.
Well, Greg, do you want to share? I mean, God, that was amazing. And I feel like all these things are going to be touched upon in your course, correct?
Mhm.
And so, if
Yes.
you want to share anything else about the course, any details about what people can also find there, and also, of course, where to go. And
Mhm.
I'm going to become an affiliate of yours, so I'll be talking about your course too, and some of my upcoming shows, including this one, obviously. But please share, anything you would like to. You also have so it's a 21-day online program, and then you have a coaching practice. You see people one-on-one and a free guide they can download as well, right?
Yeah. So my new online program is called Healing the Mind, A Journey to Wholeness. And it's a 21-day holistic and integrative approach to mental health. But honestly, it can really be applied to anything, because usually the work that you have to do when it comes to healing from anything is really the
Yeah.
same, no matter what
Yeah.
the symptom is. So
Yeah. I
this
mean, I always
21,
say your fitness journey is your self-development journey, right? Because I mean,
yeah,
it's all the
it's
same.
all the same work.
Yeah.
Everything affects everything. All
Yeah.
systems are integrated. So
Right.
it's a 21-day guided program. Each day there's two teaching videos, and there's downloadable PDFs and action items that I walk you through each day.
Cool.
It's broken down into 3 1-week modules. The first week is module one is called Foundations, which, like we talked about, is just dialing in the foundational principles. We go through nutrition for mental health and sleep hygiene, and working with the breath and movement practices, working in and working out, and doing Tai Chi and Qigong, putting together some routines and establishing healthy boundaries, and all that, just foundational principles, and dialing all that in week one. And then week two is called Elevation, where we go a little deeper. We go into our core survival archetypes, which we talked a little bit about today, some of the archetypes, but I think we talked more about that in our
We
first
did.
podcast. We
Yeah.
talked quite a bit about archetypes. So we dive into a lot of that in week two. We dive into exploring the shadow and healing the inner child, and going into our core addictions, and a lot of really relevant topics for the world today. That's all explored in week 2. And there's a lot of different meditation practices and healing techniques. Um, we go
That's
into how to
great.
work with the mind and the emotions, EFT and tapping and all that
Oh, yeah.
kind of cool stuff. And in week 3, it's called integration, where we start to integrate a lot of the laws of nature, like the seasons and the rhythms and the
Oh, yeah.
elements, and really creating more balance and harmony in ourselves and understanding how the laws of nature live right inside of us. So that's week 3, as we really restore a lot of that balance and we integrate a lot of the healing work that we did in the first 2 weeks. So it's a really nice flow of 21 days, and it's not something that requires, a full day of time for, the 21 days. You can, in half hour a day, you can do a lot of that
Oh,
work and
that's
implement
wonderful.
some of the practices. So it's really kind of gentle and gives you,
Yeah.
bite-sized pieces, and really walks you through that 21-day process. And then I usually recommend my students to go through that program. And then once they come out after the 21 days, if they still feel like they need some more coaching, I have my one-on-one coaching practice where we can do some of the more deeper work and more individualized, more personalized work. So if your
Nice.
listeners are interested in enrolling in the program, they can go to healing4d.com. That's the number 4d.com /HTM, which stands for Healing the Mind.
Oh, okay.
You'll
Yeah.
give your affiliate link
I
in the
will. Yeah, I'll
notes,
share that.
so they can just click
Yeah.
that link. And
Okay.
if they use the code podcast20, they can save 20% off to get started in their
Oh,
enrollment.
great.
And if they're
I'll include that
interested
too.
yeah, and if they're interested in working with me one-on-one, or they want to hear more about my coaching programs and offerings, they can go to healing4d.com. And if they go to healing4d.com /call, they can set up a call with me and we can discuss all of this if they want to explore some of that further.
Wonderful. That's
Yeah.
fantastic. Thank you so much, Greg. It was so good to see you again.
Yeah, you as well. And I really enjoyed everything we dove into and kind of like wove everything into, what's
Yeah.
going on in the world today. And I think people will probably take away some good tools and some good awarenesses to, implement into their life and relationships and all that good stuff.
Yeah, I hope so. I think they will too. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for sharing such valuable information and wisdom today, Greg. I appreciate it.
Thanks again.
All right.